Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Eyes of the Opposition series. This is of course a show in which I get the perspective of an opposition fan and see how they're thinking ahead of the game Arsenal will be playing against them, which is of course this week the League Cup match against Nottingham Forest. Now, if you are watching the Quick Take show, which is of course our show where I have several of the podcast boys on giving their views ahead of the game, a rather, it's probably fair to say, half-cut Mike from the Gooners podcast did highlight the fact that I went to the last time Arsenal played Nottingham Forest and we lost, rather embarrassingly, and it wasn't great. And he says that if I'm not going to this game, we might have a chance of winning. And I am, for some, fortunately, for myself, I'd call it unfortunately, because I'd much rather be there. But maybe that means we've got a better chance. But we're going to jump straight into the show today and find out what the other side are thinking. I'm very happy to be joined by Steve Toplis from the Forest Ramble, really fantastic Nottingham Forest podcast. Link will be in the description for that, for their Twitter, so please do go check them out. Let them know what your thoughts are ahead of the game. Please do. I'm sure they'll be happy to interact and chat with you guys. But we're going to jump straight in and ask that question. It does link back to what I said there about the previous game in which we played Nottingham Forest. Last time we lost, I want to know what has changed, Stephen, between now and then.
Well, Forest have changed quite a bit since the last time they played Arsenal in that FA Cup tie in 2018. Most notably, Eric Lehigh and Ben Brereton, who scored in that game, are no longer at the club. And in the time, in those 18 months or so since, we've gone through Aitor Karanka, Martin O'Neill as managers, and we now have Sabri Lamouchi in as the head coach. So there's been plenty of change at Forest, and it's a very different looking team to the one that last faced Arsenal. What to expect from this Sabri Lamouchi team? They do play good football, but they're also quite resolute defensively. So they will, against teams like Arsenal, who are very good on the ball and can command possession of a game, they will be dogged, they will defend well and work hard. But when they have the ball on the attack, they can be very clinical. And there's been times this season, games against Fulham and Leeds, where they've had to dig in, but they've done that, played their football and ended up coming away from those places with results.
Now, there is a link between Nottingham Forest and Arsenal that has sort of arisen more recently, especially after this summer, and that is the sale of Cole Jenkinson from Arsenal to Nottingham Forest for around, it was a few million quid from far as I'm aware, which in this day and age, and if you look at Arsenal's summer spending, actually equated to part of the reason why Arsenal spent hardly anything at all this summer. But a long servant at the club, fans liked the guy even though he didn't play too many games for us in his final couple of years at Arsenal mainly. I mean, if I'm honest, I reckon we could have had a decent player there. An injury really hit him hard and he never sort of recovered that. But he had a really fantastic time on loan at West Ham, I remember. But since then, never really sort of got to the heights that he achieved during that loan spell. Now he has left and he has gone to Forest. So, Stephen, I'm really, really intrigued to know how he's done since he's left the Emirates.
Cole Jenkinson joined Forest in the summer. He's played a couple of games for us since coming in from Arsenal, but unfortunately picked up a leg injury in a game against Preston a few weeks ago. So he's out for a month and he is going to miss the game at the Emirates. On the whole, he's looked largely quite solid in the games that he's played. You can see with his touch on the ball and how comfortable he is with the ball at his feet that he has been an Arsenal player. You know, you'd expect that sort of standard from Arsenal footballers. Defensively, he's been pretty sound as well, and from a Championship side's perspective, he's been a really good signing. And I think over the course of the season, he'll prove to be quite valuable for us.
Now, Forest have had a decent start to the season, doing quite well, up in the top half of the Championship. And of all those Championship teams, Forest have always been, for me, the team that have never really quite got to the point of being a team to compete to get into the Premier League. There's so many of those ex-Premier League teams in that division, and Forest just can't quite get there. I really would like to see them as someone who, long-time listeners to the show know I went to Nottingham Trent University, and so I've got that sort of affiliation with the city, and so I always look out for the Forest scores and wish them the best. But maybe that is something that they need to push towards. Obviously, Arsenal are going to rotate heavily for the game. As we know, they've got a big game against Manchester United at the weekend and will want to rest a lot of their key players. So I'm really intrigued, Stephen, how you actually think this game is going to play out.
It's hard to know exactly how Forest will fare against Arsenal, given that A lot of that is going to depend on how much Unai Emery decides to rotate his team and the kind of players that he'll play in this tie. If he goes for a very young side that's not so experienced, then Forest will have a chance of getting a result and they'll fancy their chances of doing that. But if he decides to put in more experience in a few of those first team names that we all know so well, then it is going to be potentially a long night ahead for Forest. So a lot of it will depend on more the Arsenal team selection. I think from the Forest perspective, Sabri Lamouchi has made a few changes in the cup games. We played Derby in the last round and beat them 3-0. They were criticised for putting out a young team, whereas Forest, they made 8 changes, but it wasn't an inexperienced team that played in that game. There was a lot of strength and depth that showed on that night and a lot of quality that come into the team. So if Forest do rotate themselves, they're still going to have what I would call a number of first team players right the way through the team. There's not going to be complete rookies or academy prospects in this side. So I think Forest on that basis would be more experienced than the Arsenal team. But Arsenal, with the quality they've got, and they only need a couple of those first teamers in there to make life difficult for Forest. So a lot of it will depend on the two team selections, but if Emery decides to shuffle his pack quite a bit, then that's where Forest will fancy themselves of getting a result.
Now, no matter the team and no matter the opposition and no matter who we currently have fielded on that pitch, there's always going to be threats in the side. We know that from playing plenty of teams in lower divisions that have hurt us on many of occasions. And Stephen, as the expert at Nottingham Forest, I would like you to know, to tell our listeners, who the Gunners fans should be looking out for on Tuesday night.
There are a couple of danger men who Arsenal need to be wary of. The main one being Joe Lolly, who is the right winger, but he cuts inside on his left foot a lot. He's got a really good shot on him, scores plenty of goals from outside the box, but he's also a threat inside it. He's a good dribbler. He's hard for defenders to face up against, so he will be one of the main threats if he does play. And the same for Lewis Grabban. He's been the main goal scorer this season and now for a little bit of time at Forest, having joined last season on a permanent deal. So if he does play, he didn't play in the previous round against Derby, he was on the bench. If he does play, then he will be the main source of goals, the main focal point in that attack, and he will look to link things up and then get on the end of chances himself. Also, potentially playing up front would be Sammy Amiobi, who is typically a left winger, but he's a very unpredictable player. He's got pace, he's got trickery, but he's also got height, which is a little bit unusual for a winger. So it gives him a different kind of threat to other players in this Forest team. He's very unpredictable as well. He's a player that causes defences a lot of problems. So if he gets the shout at the Emirates, I think he'll be looking to give that Arsenal defence a tough night. Also in midfield is João Carvalho, who is the playmaker, plays more as the number 10. So he's a real creative outlet. He'll be looking to thread those balls through for Grabban and the wingers to get onto and be looking to create as much as possible. He's the player in the team that has that little spark, that bit of genius where you'll find a pass from nowhere, or he'll have a shot or a free kick from outside the box that goes in. He's got that little bit of quality about him that can potentially win a game. Also, not so much danger men in the sense of creating chances or scoring goals, but players like Worrell and Dawson at the back have been strong all season, and Brice Samba in goal is in form, so they'll be looking to frustrate the Arsenal forwards and make it a difficult night for them.
Now, this all boils down to one key thing, and that is the final question, which is always our prediction. Stephen, Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, what prediction have you got going into this cup tie?
It's a bit of a hard one to predict this, because if Arsenal put out some youngsters and it's not a very experienced side, then you might fancy Forest will be able to get a result. But Forest away from home are constantly a threat. They will attack in numbers on the counter. They'll look to frustrate Arsenal, make life difficult for them, and then really flourish in attack. So I think there'll be plenty of goals in this. Looking at possibly 2-2 or 3-2. My heart says Forest will get there and get a win, but realistically, if Arsenal put out some of their experienced names, it's going to be tough for Forest, and I can see, with plenty of goals in this one, finishing 3-2 to Arsenal.
So there you have it. Everything you need to know ahead of Arsenal's cup tie against Nottingham Forest. A huge thank you to Steve Toplis for throwing in all of his thoughts and opinions on Arsenal's game against Forest in the League Cup. Wish them the best of the season. Wish them the best of luck. Of course, not in tomorrow's game. I'd quite like to see our youngsters come out and get a win against Forest. It's going to be intriguing to see what lineup Unai Emery fields in this competition that he's sort of semi-taken seriously in his time here, as serious as I sort of expected him to. But it's a big game for Forest. It's going to be interesting to see if they can match the same performance that they put in against Arsenal the last time they played them. Different surroundings this time at the Emirates. It's no longer up in the East Midlands, but we're going to intrigue to see what type of game plays out. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please can you give the show a like? Please can you subscribe with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show, and you can get involved with some of our live shows. You've missed a couple of shows maybe. Last night we did our podcast with Kenny and Deluded Gooner, and we also released the Quick Take, which is the show in which we get the views of all of the podcast guys ahead of the big fixture, get their predictions in that league table, and ultimately see who's winning, because we're now doing this league fixture thing. We're seeing who can get the best predictions right. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please do go check the show out. But thank you ever so much for listening. I'll see you again straight after the Nottingham Forest game, and that's why you need to click those notifications button for the live raw reaction show and getting my thoughts after the game's completion. I'll see you then. Keep it real, keep it Arsenal, and as always, up the Arsenal.